Howdy folks, this is Big Sam. Welcome back to the Mosin Museum. Today, we've got a really special opportunity. We're going to be taking a look at a really early French contract Mosin. And we've looked at a few here before on the channel, but today we're actually going to disassemble this rifle and look at some of the really fine details, because this one is probably in the nicest condition of any Chateau that I've personally ever handled up close. It's absolutely fabulous. And what's also cool about this particular example is it's in the original stock. So we're going to take a close-up look at that as well. But what's also really fabulous is this retains the original cartouche from the Chateau factory in France from 1894, which I think illustrates how good a shape this gun is actually in. And in fact, if you look down in the description below, I posted a link where you can download a ultra high resolution photograph of that. It's about 15 megabytes and has our watermark on it. So feel free to share that and post that wherever you'd like. Very few people have ever had a chance to really see what the original cartouche looked like on one of these rifles. So here's your chance, go take a look. So let's go ahead and disassemble this rifle and see what is really making this thing tick, because it's pretty cool. All right, so now that we've got our rifle disassembled, we can take a closer look at just what is going on here. The first thing I want to note is the amount of bluing that's still preserved on this rifle. This is extremely unusual to see on an original Russian, later used by Finland, rifle like this one, especially such an early one like this Chateau from 1894. Pretty much all of these that you'll see today are really beat up, and they've had to been refinished, and the rifling is kind of rough on them. None of that's the case with this particular gun, and you have to ask yourself why and really how. Somehow this gun really managed to evade most of the use in the Russo-Japanese War, World War I, and then all of the wars that Finland went through. The Civil War, the Continuation War, the Winter War, the Lapland War. Somehow this rifle just managed to not see a ton of use, which is phenomenal because, again, we just don't get to see a prime example of an early French gun like this. So without further ado, let's take a closer look. The first thing I want to mention here, starting off, is actually the barrel markings themselves. Because the bluing is almost always gone, it's kind of hard to tell, but on this one we can actually see that the Chateau factory stamped all of these manufacturing markings, including the year and the serial number, after the bluing was done. We can see those markings are actually in the white, which is fantastic. It's really hard to tell if that's really the case from all the examples that I've seen up until this point, so that really helps us understand exactly the process that they went through when they were manufacturing and stamping these markings. Next, on the bottom here, we can see there's actually a flat on the bottom of the barrel at the 6 o'clock position here. And you'll see this on most Mosin Nagants, both French-made and also Russian-made, made before 1895. If we turn it over here, you are going to see these interesting markings. These are some French manufacturing markings here and some inspector markings. I'm not any expert by any means, especially when it comes to French markings, so maybe someone else out there will know what some of these mean. Now, why would some of these early Mosins have a flat on the bottom of the barrel? I think it's got to be because they took a lot of inspiration from the model 1886 French Lebel, and I've had a chance to look at some of those, and you'll see the same thing on those. Those will also have a flat on the bottom of the barrel. So I'm assuming because they were doing it there, the Russians decided, well, we should do it too. And so, well, they did, again, up until 1895. And then they decided to stop, probably because it just saved time to not have to machine that bit off. Moving further back here, this is a marking I would expect to see on a mid to early or before 1894 French-produced Mosin Nagant. This is a P with a star over it. This is a Chateau marking, and one that you can use to identify whether or not Chateau produced this receiver. And this comes in handy because if we look at the receiver tang here, you're going to see that there's actually no markings here at all. You wouldn't see any real tang markings on Châtellerault guns until very late 1894. Before then, you're going to see receiver tangs like this where there's just nothing. There were a couple other Mosin Nagant manufacturers that would do this. Most famously, New England Westinghouse tended to not put any kind of markings on the bottom of their receiver tangs. And also, as far as I know, Tula in 1894, and maybe before that, did not put any kind of markings on their receiver tangs as well. At least from some of the examples that I've seen. Something to keep in note of because I think it's very interesting. I've gotten questions from folks in the past about receiver tang markings, and sometimes people have trouble identifying a receiver, especially when it's been rebarreled by Finland. Who made the receiver itself? And if there's no marking on the tang, hopefully that helps you out a little bit, figure out what else to look for. We can see some of these smaller components have indeed been replaced by Finland. This is a trigger manufactured by the Tula factory before 1928 here. We can see there's a little hole here. Finland would put a pin through that hole in a lot of cases. It would change the angle of the trigger spring, and it would change the dynamics of the trigger pull. Not a super common modification to see, and sometimes like this, the pin was actually removed. I think more research is due on that one. It's a pretty interesting modification that I wanted to note. If you look at the ejector here, you'll actually see there's some marking. It looks like somebody heated this up. And it could be because one of the old wives' tales I've heard is that these interrupters, they actually had changed the angle of them when they adopted the Spitzer cartridge around 1910. So it's possible that that's what that is, although I think more research is really needed in that area. But I've seen this many times, and it's just something I wanted to note. If we flip the rifle over here, we can see there's no bluing on the inside of the bolt channel. I believe that's original. I don't think the Châtellerault factory actually blued the inside of the bolt channels on these rifles originally. So that's very uncommon to see as well. A lot of times these rifles were re-blued by Finland, so that's really cool. We can see there's a ton of bluing still left on the receiver itself. It has this wonderful patina that we can see. And one other thing I wanted to mention is that there's no imperial crest on the receiver. I know some folks have had some questions about this, so it's something else I'd like to address. There are, like the tang markings, a few manufacturers that didn't mark anything on the receiver tangs, as well as the receiver at the top of the receiver at the 12 o'clock position. So no crest here. Up until very late 1894, again, Châtellerault wouldn't put any type of crest up here at all. Some other people that would do this, again, kind of rehashing, but New England Westinghouse also, for almost all their rifles, they would not have any type of marking here at the 12 o'clock position. And then some of the earlier guns, like some of the early Tula guns, wouldn't have any marking up here as well. So hopefully that helps. Now, if we see here at about the 9 o'clock position on the barrel, there's a M. It's possible to see different letter combinations here, but a lot of times you will see a letter here at this position on a Châtellerault produced Mosin. This letter indicates who provided the steel for this rifle. One other letter I've seen combination I've seen is JH, which you'll see on some of the later 1894 and even 1895 produced rifles. But again, I'm not an expert, especially when it comes to French markings, so someone else is going to have to figure out what that stands for, and maybe someone already does. If you know, post down in the comments. A lot of these markings we do have on our markings page, so if you want to go back and look at them anytime, you can check out our markings page, which I'll link to down in the description below at mosinmuseum.com. Interesting on this one, we actually see this has an Ijevsk cavalry marked rear sight. We've done a video talking about these before. I believe these were used on both Dragoon as well as Cossack rifles. And, sometimes Finland would even repurpose them on these M91 rifles. Of course, this is not the original sight because the Châtellerault factory would not produce these Konovalov-style rear sights. Chateauroux stopped producing rifles in 1895. This rear sight didn't come around until, well, around 1910. But if we flip it up, this is really cool. You can see the original D in a circle marking. It's another Chateauroux manufacturer / proof marking. And you'll typically see this particular marking on your rear sight spring. So if you have a Mosin, or if you're looking at a Mosin that has this Konovalov style rear sight and it was used by Finland, sometimes you'll see Finland reuse these Chateauroux sight springs on other guns. Just something to note. And what's cool, this is, again, the original rear sight spring to this rifle, and it's in the white. Absolutely fantastic, something you don't see very often. And we can see there's a ton of bluing still on this rifle. Now, even guns with a lot of wear, you can typically still find bluing under the barrel at around the 6 o'clock position, where it's, hidden by the wood line in the stock. But this one, I mean, even without that, it's still got a lot of bluing. This is just kind of an anomaly, folks. There's really no other good way to put it. If we look at the front sight here, we can see this is a finished modified front sight that's a little bit taller than usual. And the muzzle, you can barely see it there, has not been counterbored. The rifling on this example is absolutely stunning. Probably the nicest rifling I've ever seen on an old Russian-used Mosin Nagant in Finland. Just incredible. Well, we've had a cool opportunity to take a look at this receiver now. Let's go ahead and switch gears a little bit and take a look at the stock, because this gun is actually in the original stock, which is absolutely amazing. So let's take a look. All right, so now we have a chance to take a look at this stock. Again, this is the original matching stock to the gun. Although it has had a few modifications, it's still really fabulous to see. This is something that's really rare, especially among Finnish-used Russian rifles, to preserve the original stock. Well, most of the time they're replaced. In fact, probably 95+% of the time it's not the original stock to that rifle. And a lot of it's because they were already captured guns from places like Germany before Finland even got their hands on it. So someone had already messed with it before Finland even had a chance to mess with it. One of the reasons this example is just so incredible. Now, the first thing I want to note here, if we look inside the barrel channel, right about here, again, in relation to where the front escutcheon is, right about here, you're going to see there's a little square. That's because originally there was a little, in fact, it would have looked basically like this. It was a little metal square, and this is what the cleaning rod would thread into. Originally, when this gun was produced, it was right here. And then in 1896, they moved it back, and that's because the cleaning rod, as you can imagine, was way shorter. So initially, up until 1896, the cleaning rods on these Mosins, the M91 rifles, were way shorter. Then they decided to make them a lot longer, but if you make it longer, you're going to have to make the channel longer. And so that's why it has to go all the way back into here now. So if you ever had a chance to look at an M91 stock, make sure to check inside the barrel channel, because you might just have a really early stock. This is one helpful way to date an early stock. And of course, this one was made in 1894, which is why we would expect to see this one. Now, looking on the inside, the wood grain and everything is in pretty good shape overall. I believe the Chateauroux factory would use walnuts, unlike their Russian counterparts who would use birch, and Finland would use typically Arctic birch. The Americans and the French would use some type of walnut, and the wood grain on this is absolutely beautiful. It does kind of remind me of some of the Remington stocks that they made for M91 rifles, which I believe those were walnut as well, so that kind of makes sense. We can see just more of the early wood grain here. Just getting it in the light so you can see what it looks like. It's very distinctive. If you've ever had a chance to look at one of these Chateauroux stocks, it's very beautiful, and it's quite distinctive from their Russian counterparts. Now, what's cool is up here, there's a little marking. You can barely see it. I think it's an S, and you'll see this on Chateauroux produced butt plates, especially the earlier ones made before mid to late 1894, as well as there's like a little proof mark here. I think this is probably an inspector number 7 here. That's probably original Chateauroux as well. Now, if we flip the stock around here, this is where things get really cool. Now, not many people have had a chance to see this before, but what's cool about this rifle is that it preserves the original cartouche. And the cartouches are almost always obliterated. So the fact that this one has it is amazing, but I've almost never had a chance to see an original Chateauroux cartouche, so I'm really happy to bring this to you guys today. We've got a high-resolution picture on our website that you can take a look at as well. So make sure to check out our markings page if you want to see more detail on this rascal. But I just wanted to share that. And then if we move this guy up here, this is an E, as in echo. And this again looks like to be an original French inspector marking. Most of these small markings are completely obliterated because these things got super beat up. So it's really incredible that we can see some of these markings here today. So overall, this is a pretty cool gun. This is not the original magazine. This is an early Tula magazine, although the magazine does preserve an early sling swivel, which the original magazine to this gun would have had. You can see there's a little Tula hammer there on the sling swivel as well. These aren't super common, so, well, it's really cool to see that. Well, I appreciate you guys' time taking a look at this really cool rifle with me here today. It's really not often that anybody has an opportunity to look at really the nitty-gritty details of one of these early French contract Mosins. So I really hope you guys enjoy the video. We've got a lot of more interesting stuff coming up real soon, so I hope you guys stay tuned for more. Let me know if you guys got any prayer requests, and we'll see you next time.